This week on CrunchWeek, we're talking about Sean Parker's guest post on TechCrunch about his wedding, VCs getting into journalism and content, and Snapchat's big funding round. Hi, I'm Lena Rao. Welcome to CrunchWeek.
I'm Colleen Taylor.
And I'm Anthony Ha.
This week was actually kind of an interesting news week. I mean, we're getting into like the summer, and it felt like a slow news week, but we actually did have, the Microsoft Build conference, which was focused on their cloud services, and also Salesforce and Oracle announced this crazy new partnership, and it was interesting because they were frenemies before. But actually, I think some of the more interesting conversation-stirring stories were some of the insidery baseball ones, right? What did you think? I mean, we had this big guest post on TechCrunch from Sean Parker about his wedding and sort of the whole scandal and controversy behind it.
Just when you thought that the Sean Parker wedding thing was done and dying and put the thing to bed, Sean Parker wrote a guest post on TechCrunch, 10,000 words. There are a lot of things about this. I mean, did you guys like the post?
In my sense of just following the coverage of his wedding before, that felt like it was knives kind of came out very early and not totally justifiably, and so I thought there was some good defense of that. But it definitely sort of then takes on I think he tried to make it into this sort of larger think piece about sort of the state of online journalism and things. And I think it's hard that trying to make that transition when it was really it was also very personal. I think was a little bit difficult. I thought.
Right. Yeah. It was interesting because there were so many different points that he talked about. I think that it was stronger when he talks about the state of online journalism and
right.
how a lot of things are just piling on top of each other. I like the section in it where he just kind of talks about blogging for dollars, which we all are. I saw one tweet out there that was as opposed to blogging for, sand. Of course, everyone's doing everything for dollars, So it's kind of ridiculous to think that journalism was ever anything else. But in the points where he says that he was waiting for a phone call, he was waiting for someone to pick up the phone and ask him a question and do some reporting.
He was saying hundreds of articles were written the day after, and only one person called him for comment.
Right.
And it is a greater sort of statement on the process journalism, angle, and how more and more journalists are sort of just reporting what other journalists are reporting instead of actually doing the legwork. I mean, we've done it here at TechCrunch, I'm sure, but
for sure.
Yeah, but it definitely was a statement on that, and I think that's kind of what I took away. It sounds like that's what you took away from it too.
Right, that was one point that I enjoyed, and I think it was a really long post. Most of the conversation about the post has just been at how long it was, 9,500 words, almost 10,000.
I feel like this is definitely one of those topics where every day the conversation goes another level of meta above and so it's gotten a little bit crazy. But.
So there are many things in here to parse, and I guess we could spend the entire episode talking about it, but we shouldn't, because he kind of laid out so many things. I think that the stuff where he's trying to say that redwood forests weren't harmed and that his little wedding couldn't possibly really harm a gigantic redwood forest. I don't think that's quite true. I think that that's a little bit whitewashing the situation a bit. I mean, the Coastal Commission said that he had done some harm. It wasn't as bad as they had feared, but it was harm. And so I think that he probably shouldn't have tried to justify that so much, because he's not going to win on that. I mean, the facts are the facts, and what the Coastal Commission, they find him for a reason. They didn't just find him for no reason. So I think that should be set aside, and that his criticisms about the pile-on from the media and how he's been kind of villainized, those make sense. It's got to be, you got to admire the guy for coming out and continuing to stand up for himself.
I mean, and I had to say this, and I know I'm probably in the minority, but the guy has he has a lot of money. He did he went big, right? You go big or you go home, and so I feel like
it was a little fancier than your wedding.
Yeah,
a little bit,
just a little bit.
Yeah.
But I don't I see a lot of criticism out there for just the cost and the extravagance of that's representing the extravagance of Silicon Silicon Valley, but like, if I had that much money, like I'd be spending that much, you know, I mean, he
Right.
gives to charity. It's not like he doesn't do that sort of stuff. Like, it's not like he's just spending on weddings and not giving any of it away.
Right, and I think that's the other thing is that it seemed like, you know, I think there's a lot of, and I mean, I don't necessarily, I'm not like an expert on like environmental review or anything. Neither do I think are a lot of the people who were criticizing him either,
Right.
though. But I think also it seemed like a lot of that stuff was really tied up in this sort of like, you know, kind of Schadenfreude about
Yeah.
like, oh, like this super rich guy embodied, you know, that they immediately wanted to make it into this kind of bigger story about, you know, about how horrible people from Silicon Valley are.
Right. And how horrible rich people are just
Yeah.
in general. And he made a good point as well that maybe we've kind of, there's a lull right now in rich people actually doing really illegal things, Bernie Madoff and things. We don't have that right now. So in lieu of that, we're going to criticize a guy getting fined for his wedding, which was really in the spirit of trying to celebrate these redwood
Yeah.
trees. He wasn't trying to cut them down. He
Right.
was really trying to celebrate. He loves this
Right.
place. He wants to support it, and he was trying to do that.
Right.
And so,
Well,
I don't
hopefully he
know.
feels like he got his sort of side of the story out there. And,
Yeah.
you know, the haters are going to hate, right?
Yeah.
The other story I think that was really interesting this week was First Round Capital, which has funded a bunch of pretty amazing startups, you know, Fab, you know, among many, many others, is launching their own content hub, you know, basically wanting to create this Harvard Business Review like destination for startups to look and see, you know, like how do I advertise on Facebook? You know, like how do I hire my first engineer? And they're really trying to go for like the how in this content strategy. But I just think it's interesting that like, you know, are we now going to be considering VCs as our competitors here? You know, I mean, we create content that we value as, you know, advice like for startups. But it's, you know, it's interesting that VCs are getting into it. It's just another thing that they're getting into besides recruiting and PR and, you know, all the other services they're now providing.
I think the fact is that venture capital is getting much more competitive.
Yeah.
Right now, venture capitalists, especially early stage ones like First Round, are going up against Angel List and these party rounds of individual people, and then other firms that deal in earlier stage stuff. This week, I think it was Oak Investment Partners that invested in Britt Morin's startup, and they normally do later stage rounds, and here they are participating in a $6 million round, Series A, for a small media company like Britt & Co. So I think that it's just being more competitive, and so they really need to market themselves as thought leaders. And I think Andreessen Horowitz has really led the way here.
Right.
And they've really positioned themselves with their blog posts and,
Yeah.
and as personalities and really smart people. And
Well,
so
and
I
they
think
just hired someone too. They just hired an editor from Wired.
Right, yeah.
And he's going to be, they haven't revealed what their content strategy is, but they did say they will have one. And so I wonder if it will be similar at all to First Rounds.
Right, and it does seem like you're, you know, I think, like you said, I think Andreessen sort of led the way, but you talk to, I think, to a lot of VCs now, and they'll say, like, yeah, like, you know, we feel like this pressure now to kind of be out there. I don't necessarily know this is necessarily universally the case, but much more the case that, you know, these firms are hiring marketing and PR people, and like where before it was just kind of here's their name, kind of pushed like the companies, you know, forward in terms of publicity,
Yeah.
but like now I think they understand that, you know, for better or worse, they kind of have to put themselves forward too.
Yeah, and Sequoia actually also hired Ben Worthen from the Wall Street Journal. I mean, I just like wonder, there's this now exchange of journalists going over to VCs. I mean, is there, like, it's like VCs are just now offering every single service. So like there's an opportunity for not only like business development people at Google to go to a VC firm, or recruiters or PR people, but now writers. So
Right.
And I think it's also part of like, you know, that it's part of this larger trend of like, I think companies in general, you know, sort of investing more in sort of content marketing,
Yeah.
which is kind of a loathsome term, but I think it's sort of the one that's
Yeah,
used.
that's right, that's right.
And I think, you know, they realize that the thing about these kind of efforts is that the content actually has to be good, or at least for some value of good. Otherwise, if it's just purely, you know, advertorial content, like no one's going to care, no one's going to read it.
Yep.
And so I think, you know, that's, you know, something that you've seen sort of on the brand side. And so, you know, now that as part of this larger context of what's happening in VC, it makes sense that it's happening in VC too.
Right.
Even though it does seem like totally crazy and like, you know, oh, okay, like when we.
almost bubble-esque.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
true. Well, it's a couple of years ago, and Andreessen once again led the way here in bringing their own in-house PR and communications people.
That's right.
not that many venture capital firms really had that. They had personal assistants, they had a receptionist or something, but they didn't have PR and marketing in-house. And Andreessen started doing that, other firms started doing that, having a lot of success with it. And so these other firms started to do that. We were just talking this week how there are more and more kind of like dinners and events that these VC firms are planning with journalists, and they're doing a lot more outreach.
I feel like I go to a dinner every week. I'm sure you guys feel that way too.
Right.
And usually they're sponsored by the VC firms, either to meet their portfolio startups or to meet their partners. And it's like, I've never eaten better, but because they're usually at very nice restaurants.
Sometimes like all these like dinners are like really bad for my liver though.
I know,
because it's always
it's a
like
lot of
hour of
drinking.
like cocktails, and just,
wine, and
It is.
I know, but yeah. So speaking of VC world, their Snapchat, the big messaging startup with like, how many users do they have now? I don't even know.
I think, oh gosh, how many snaps did they say were being?
It's something crazy as we
something
race
like
to
they've
our
already
computers.
sent, I think, something like 200 million snaps have been sent through the service. Something like, and that's just 2 months ago. It was 150 million. So that just
Wow.
gives you an idea of how quickly it's growing. That's
So
by a third in 2 months. It's
they-
just blowing up.
They officially raised their funding after all the rumors around it. It was 80 million in total at like a $800 million valuation, which is crazy. No revenue yet, apparently. So,
Yep.
but still valued at that much. At that much. What was really controversial about that story was actually not necessarily just about the funding or even the valuation, but
Although there was the usual complaining about like
course.
this valuation for a
the
pre-revenue
billion.
company.
Yeah,
But
exactly. But the founders took $20 million off. There are two founders, right? Two
Evan
co-founders.
Spiegel and someone else.
And they took 20 million off the table, for themselves. So a lot of people questioned whether that's the right move.
Well, it's interesting because Alexia had this story. She scooped it this past weekend, 80 million raised. And then on Monday, Snapchat came out. It was Monday, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It
that's
was
right.
Monday.
Yeah.
That it was 60 million. And then all these other publications wrote, oh, TechCrunch was wrong. They did raise an IVP led, but it was 60 million, not 80 million. And then a couple days later, it turned out TechCrunch was right. It was 80 million, but 20 million of that automatically went to the founders. So it was only 60 million in capital for the
Right.
company. So we were right, but
We
yeah.
were right, incomplete, but I think it was fair for some people to be like it wasn't a totally accurate story, but and I would also argue in both cases it was kind of nitpicky, but
Right. Because what's $20 million between friends?
between
but-
tech blogs, right?
But yeah, and these guys are young. These guys are 22, 23.
Yeah.
I think it was, very smart for them to take that kind of money off
Yeah,
the
of
table.
course. They'll never, $10 million is a lot of money, like to have free and clear.
Right.
That's your money,
And it
that
does
will
seem
change
like
their lives
yeah.
forever, even if they get nothing from the company.
Which is, I think the thing that, it seems like a lot of people, there's definitely an argument to be made to like give the founders liquidity, like so they don't feel that kind of pressure
Yep.
for like an early exit. But yeah, I think it was, just the amount of money and where the stage the company is in now that I think struck a lot of people as like, wow, that's
Right.
that's a little crazy.
Yeah, and it definitely because of some of the past things that have happened with companies that have taken some money off the table like that for founders. I think Groupon was one of
Yeah,
them that was
famous.
criticized a lot for founders taking a lot of money off. The connotation is just not that great.
Yeah. Yeah, this is good though because maybe the situation was that they could have just sold right away. Didn't Facebook offer like 40 million or 50
That's
million
right,
or something
yeah.
to them? And so they could have taken that. And then they didn't. And so now they kind of have a nice little middle ground where they're
Right.
still going to go bigger and the venture capitalists are involved. So it's not completely their company anymore, but they get something out of it. So they're incentivized to stick around. They were really coming, it sounds like, from
lot
a
of
position.
something.
Yeah.
A lot of something. But compared to the valuation of the company, which is 800 million, it's not a ton, but that's just
Right.
a valuation on paper. It's not real
Well,
money yet.
that's all the time we have for this week.
For a slow news week, we had a lot to talk about. This is great.
I know.
But we're going to be gone for the next 2 weeks. We are not
That's
going to be
right.
filming a Crunch Week because next week it's 4th of July and we will all be at our barbecues listening to Andrew Mason's new album, Heartbroken. And then the week after that, a bunch of us are going to be traveling on the road in Los Angeles, a bunch of us covering startups there. So check back in 3 weeks and enjoy your summer vacation. Thanks for watching.